instructor Christina Howard. Normally I make these kind of introductory videos sitting in an office with my office-y crap behind me, but I need to go down and close the gate to my property, and it's a beautiful day outside, so I figured I would just make the intro video and take you along with me down to the gate. So that's what we're doing. Just a little bit about me, since I'm going to be getting to know all of you over the next 10 or 11 weeks, and possibly even after that. I'm in my early 30s. I live in Oregon on a farm in the forest, which you can probably see. There's the road. My house is back over there. The property is an 1880s homestead that was settled by a Swiss lady a long time ago, and now I take care of the property along with my neighbor. So that's where I live, and that's why my internet is a little bit iffy. So I want to welcome you to spring term of 2022, and I am so excited because this term, for the first time in a couple years, I actually get to see you in person, and we get to be in the lab together, which is such a blessing. So Clark does have human cadavers in addition to all of our other lab resources, and this is a huge deal because it's very unusual for a community or junior college to have such facilities, and we have really nice ones. So I could not be more thrilled to be back in the lab with all of you, and we will be working with the cadavers a little bit this term, so I just wanted to warn you about that. The course is hybrid, meaning that it's partially online and partially in person. And I did this on purpose because although it really sucks to not be able to see you guys in person, and it has for the entire duration of the pandemic, one of the nice things about remote teaching is that it offers students a lot more flexibility to take the course as far as time and scheduling than an in-person course traditionally has. So in the old model, we had lecture 3 times a week where I stand in front of you and talk for a long time and you try to stay awake and listen. And then we have testing in class and yada, yada, yada. It's just like the normal college model. For this term, and hopefully all terms going forward, it's going to work a little bit differently. So lecture will be entirely online. I have a bunch of really content-rich, interactive YouTube videos that I've made, and I will continue to make them throughout the term. So you'll watch those for your lecture content. And then what we'll do is meet on Zoom and in person if you want. All these things are optional, to discuss anything that you need clarification on. For example, if you have a hard time with something and you're like, I'm just not quite getting this, that's what the Zoom or in-person sessions are for. But at no point am I going to be standing in front of you orating about the topic. That is accomplished by you watching the videos. So what I'm hoping is that this will allow students more flexibility so that you don't have to worry about getting up for a 7:30 in the morning lecture, for example, or missing a lecture session or missing an in-person lecture exam. You can consume the lecture content on a schedule of your choosing and whenever it's convenient for you. And even better, you can also repeat the lectures as many times as you want. So you can push pause and rewind if I say something that you kind of missed. You can make me repeat myself ad nauseum. So it's really a better model for lecturing just because it allows you guys more bandwidth and more flexibility for how you consume the content. So that's how lecture is going to work. All of the testing for lecture is going to remain online. Again, allowing you flexibility to take some of the tests in the class from your home. But that does require that you have a computer, not a tablet, not a netbook preferably, an actual computer. And you certainly shouldn't be trying to take Canvas tests from a phone. Canvas's LMS is just really not designed for mobile user interfaces and operating systems, and it does really poorly, and it causes just sort of undue grief and upsetness. So a computer is a requirement. In the tech tips on Canvas, there is a little section that specifies how you can obtain a loaner laptop if you need one, or of course you can always just go to the library and use one of the computers there. So you've got lots of options, and I'm here to connect you with whatever resources you might need to get that stuff done. But suffice it to say, you will need a working computer with a full-blown operating system, not a mobile one. So that's a must for this class. I'm going to pause right now because my arm is tired and I need to close my gate to keep ne'er-do-wells off my property because I live out in the sticks. So when I come back, we will move on to discussing how lab is going to work, and then just some general guidelines for the course, my expectations of you, what assessments are going to be like, and how we're going to work together in this hybrid model to make sure that you learn as much as possible and hopefully have a good time doing it. So I will be right back. Okay, so the gate is shut, as you can see, and we're going to walk back up one of my driveways, and I'll just show you around the farm while I talk. I think it'll be more relaxing. So like that's the road back. I'm going to walk up there, and then I will take you to the north field while we discuss. And my arm's getting pretty tired, so I'm going to switch. Okay, so I mentioned when I came back from the gate we were going to talk a little bit about lab, because I just sort of described how lecture was going to work. So again, lab, we're meeting in person in the science building, the new STEM building, which I desperately miss. It was my home and I haven't seen it for a long time, so I'm excited to be back there with you. Just for clarity, since a lot of you probably haven't had quite as much familiarity with A&P, there are some similarities with Biology 160 as it used to be taught. And so what I mean by that is the lecture and lab components are co-requisites, so your final grade is an additive total of the points from both of those, but they are operated separately. So every week, a couple times a week, you and I will meet in the lab, and we're going to work with the materials in the lab. Lab is really more about learning what the structures that you're learning about in lecture look like, what their names are, how to identify them, how to spell them correctly, and how to communicate about them correctly and effectively. So that's what you'll be doing in lab. The kinds of things that we interact with in the lab, we're not really doing experiments in the same way that you used to for Biology 160. Instead, we have microscopes, which you'll interact with right off the bat. That's our first unit for lab this term, as well as models of gross and anatomical stuff, and of course, our cadavers. So what a lab session will look like for you basically is you'll come to lab and I will give you a short mini lecture, which is really more like a tutorial, about how to find, identify, and recognize some of the things on the list of terms that are fair game for your lab practical. And then after I give you that tutorial, you will break away and just work on learning and memorizing those things in small groups at your tables. So that's kind of how an individual lab session is going to go. And then after a few of those, we have 3 lab units. So at the end of a lab unit, you'll have what's called a lab practical. A lab practical is a test that basically is me pointing at various things. Like, so if it's a model, I might put tape on something, or if it's a microscope slide, I might push the pointer at something. So I'll indicate something, and I'll ask you to tell me what it is. And I might also ask you to give me a short function for it, or tell you how it relates to something. So the testing modality for practicals is not multiple choice. It's more like me being like, hey, what's that thing? And where does it belong? So that's the general idea for lab practicals. And I'll give you practice questions. Oh boy. I'll give you practice questions in advance so you have a better idea of what to expect, because I know for some of you that testing model is kind of going to be unfamiliar. So our first lab unit is going to be the histology of tissues, all the different tissue types of the body, so connective tissue, epithelial tissue, etc. And we're also going to do the histology of the integumentary system, aka the skin. So that's kind of the deal, just so you know what to expect right off the bat. After we do histology, I don't know if you can hear that, but the Stellar's jays on the farm are very loud. They run around in gangs and scream all the time. So anyway, the first unit is histology. The second unit, we will work with actual human skeletal remains. We have a great collection of skeletons at Clark, and you will learn the names of all the bones, what features and parts they have, and how to identify whether the bone is left or right, even if the bone is just off of a skeleton and sitting on the table. So that's going to be the second unit. The third unit is going to be the muscular system, and for that we will be doing some cadaver work. Now, you don't have to dissect anything. I'm responsible for that. All you have to do is learn to identify a list of muscles, and it's not every single muscle in the human body. That would be too much. So you're going to learn to identify them, and then I'll put a pin in them with a number. And for the practical, you'll just have to look at the pinned muscle and tell me which one it is. The fourth and the final lab unit is going to be a combination of histology of the nervous system and the sensory organs, so eyes and ears primarily, and the gross anatomy of some other neural structures, so like brain, cranial nerves, spinal cords, etc. So that's going to be the general gist of all your lab stuff. So regarding your 4 lab tests, those are all of the tests you're going to have in lab. So unlike for lecture, there is no lab final that's cumulative. You just do the first test, the second test, the third test, and the fourth test, and then you're done with lab. For the lecture, there will be 3 midterms, about 3 to 4 chapters apiece, and then 1 final that is cumulative across the entire term. So what we're going to do to prepare for those is during our office hours and Zoom sessions, we will workshop things that you're having difficulty with. You can ask me questions. I can give you drawing tutorials in a Khan Academy kind of style to explain stuff that you're having a hard time with. And we can also practice problem solving and applied learning using the case study activities. So let me explain the case studies next. Okay, sorry, I was a little bit out of breath from walking up the hill. This is the North Field. So it's a big field in the middle of a bunch of trees. These are mostly Douglas firs. And then in the middle of the field, there is my favorite tree, which is an alder that's about 130 years old-ish. You can see it's held together by some steel bands because, you know, like any tree, it's suffered the weather over the years, but it's still doing well, and it's home to lots of critters. And this is one of my favorite places to sit, so I figured I would come here and then we just talk about the rest of the class at the tree. Except for now it's starting to rain, so that plan might be foiled. Let me move a little bit under the tree. Worst case scenario, I can go pop into the forest and sit under one of the cedars. Okay, that's better. So, I mentioned the case studies. So, just to give you a little bit of context, because I think being transparent about what I make you do for the class and why I make you do that is only respectful, you know. There's a difference in education theory between what's called formative assessment and summative assessment. So assessment is just a way to describe ways that I try to find out how much you know and remember of what we've learned. Formative assessment is me assessing and giving you a grade for learning that you do along the way. So any activity that is not the end point of learning, but an on-the-way thing. So things that I would grade not necessarily for accuracy, but rather for effort and follow through and evidence of learning in progress. And then summative assessment is the end point. So this is something like a multiple choice test. At the end of a chunk of learning, seeing how much you manage to retain out of that chunk. So historically, A&P has been, at Clark anyway, has been pretty much only summative assessment, where you learn and learn and learn, and then you have a test, and then you either do well on the test or not so well, and that's kind of it. That puts a lot of pressure on students. I know from personal experience, having been a student, that it put a lot of pressure on me. And I know from having taught for so many years that we have to do some amount of summative assessment, because how else can we figure out if you're ready to go to the next step? But it's not ideal, and I frankly don't like it that much. So I have begun replacing some of the summative assessment in A&P with more formative assessment, which gives you an opportunity to earn points towards your final grade that are lower stakes and less anxiety inducing. So for this class, those are going to be case studies. So a case study, if you're not familiar, is basically a scenario, sometimes in real life, sometimes hypothetical, that describes a problem or event and then asks you some questions that require that you sort of think through and demonstrate how you can apply what you're learning in A&P to the scenario that I present. So for medical case studies, these are often like, I will tell you a story about something that happened to a patient and how a doctor dealt with that happening, and then ask you some questions about the story and ask you to use your book learning and your knowledge to analyze the situation and tell me some things about it. So because you're still learning during this time, I don't expect you to enter my class already an expert at anatomy and physiology. That would be ridiculous. Because you're still learning during those, I have a rubric for the case studies, which I will share with you, but I don't grade them for accuracy, which means that you actually don't have to get them 100% correct to get full credit on them. The process of learning is messy and necessarily involves making mistakes. Mistakes are how humans learn, unfortunately. So what I'm trying to do with the case studies is create some space for you to engage in the messy work of learning, make some mistakes, and not be punished for them by loss of points. So you can look at, and we will go over the rubric for the case studies on Canvas later, but I wanted to let you know what their intention is and the specific reason that I designed them the way I designed them. So it's not busy work, it is to benefit you and help you show me what learning you're doing along the way and demonstrate your progress in a lower stakes, less scary setting than a test. So I'll also, side note, like a lot of students tell me that while they're initially uncomfortable because they're not used to doing that kind of thing for an assignment, they end up having fun. So my goal is also to make them fun. I try to keep them from being dry and boring as much as I can, because it bores me to write boring assignments and to read responses to boring assignments, and I can hardly expect you to enjoy an assignment if I make it boring, so I try not to. So the case studies amount to about 80 points total. There are going to be 4 of them at 20 points each. We will workshop them together. You can work together with your group mates. The only thing I ask of you is to please do not plagiarize, either from submissions from previous students or copying sources from the internet or each other, etc. There is a plagiarism checker built into Canvas that will analyze your submissions and compare them to stuff on the internet, and it's really easy to tell if you plagiarized. I can see if you boosted text from PubMed articles. I can see if you boosted text or even the entire assignment from a student who took my class previously. And despite that, and despite the fact that I'm not grading them for accuracy, every single term someone tries to plagiarize, even though I can always see. So this is me asking you, not instructor to student, but person to person, please, please, please don't make me have the awkward conversation with you where I remind you that I told you I could tell and you tried to lie anyway, because like it's just, no one's gonna have a fun time in that conversation. It's gonna suck for everyone. So I make you sign an academic honesty contract in the introductory module. You may have already seen it. Please just try to abide by that. I'm not a stickler about citations. Like, I need you to cite if you borrow an idea, but I'm not going to nitpick your formatting of the citations. As long as you make a good faith effort to do your own work and show me if you cite something, we're good. So just relax, be honest, put in some good effort, and you should be just fine. So I just realized that when I turned, there's holes in this tree. These holes are from woodpeckers and sapsuckers, which are a kind of woodpecker. And what they do is basically peck a hole in the tree, and then, I don't see any here. Oftentimes they will jam food items into these holes to save them for later. It's like a little pantry that they make. So that's what that is. So if you see them on your trees, you can be like, aha, I know what that is now. Okay, so I'm trying to think of other bases I need to cover in this intro video. So I'm just going to hit a couple points. For the lecture tests, which again will be online, I do give you 2 attempts. So the questions that are the lecture questions come from a large pool of questions that are drawn from the various chapters that the test will be on. And then I tell Canvas to randomly assign you an assortment of those questions. So what that means is the questions that you see on your first attempt, if you choose to do a second attempt, They will not be all the same questions. They will be different. If you choose to do 2 attempts, your score will be the average of the 2, not the highest. And this is for fairness purposes because the average reflects your real ability to answer questions as a student. So I can't tell you whether or not you should use your second attempt. That is up to you. But the nice thing about making a second attempt is that I leave the test open for a fair amount of time, usually around 48 hours. So what that allows students to do is if you think you studied well enough for the test and then you do the first attempt and you're like, oh no, something has gone terribly wrong, I did not study well enough, you can usually identify what went wrong during the test and do some quick cramming and then do the second attempt. And almost always the second attempt is a better score than the first because the first attempt kind of gave you a feel for what the questions would be like. So while I'm never going to tell you whether you should or shouldn't do it, I can tell you that it's almost always the case that students do better on the second attempt, and that brings your average up. So that's the information I have for you. And I do need you to know that I can see a event log for all test attempts, which shows me at what time you opened the test, how long it took you to answer each question, whether you viewed a question, flagged it, or answered it, and also how many times you navigated away from the Canvas test page and then came back to it. So what that means is sometimes students will send me an email saying, I tried to do the test and then my computer died or my internet went out and I lost access to the test. And I couldn't do, X, Y, Z of the questions. And then when I look at the test log, what I can see is they opened the test and used the entire 70 minutes or so of the test to stare at the questions and look at them one by one, not answer any, and then they closed the test, which tells me that they were probably eyeballing the questions and maybe screenshotting them to try and do better on the second attempt. And they were hoping that I would not catch them doing that and that they would be able to thereby gain some advantage on the test. So just like the plagiarism checker, I just need everyone to be very clear about the fact that I have very detailed views of what you're doing during the test as far as Canvas is concerned. And if I need additional information about what you were up to during the test, I can request it from IT services. So again, all you have to do to avoid that is just be honest and do your best to prepare. But also, online testing is open notes and open book. If you go into the test expecting to look up every question, you will not be successful because you won't have enough time. But what that does mean is if you're very well prepared, but you have a brain fart and you need to look something up, you can do that. That's totally fine. And that really benefits students and improves student success. So I'm not mad about the open notes and open book, but since I'm generous enough to make it open notes and open book, please don't abuse that privilege by additionally trying to gain some advantage. I'm not here to stand in the way of your success at all. I'm here to help you succeed. But it's really disappointing when students clearly come to class with the mindset that I am trying to prevent you from being successful and with the attitude that that justifies cheating. And I know a lot of students feel that way because they have negative educational experiences in their background and they genuinely think that students are trying to put something over on them. That's not what I'm here to do. I love my job very much and I wouldn't be doing this work if I didn't actually enjoy it. So I'm not here trying to prevent you from going to nursing school. It's the farthest thing from my mind. So I'm gonna pause and move because it's raining and my phone's getting all wet. And then when we come back, I'm just gonna tell you a little bit about my general teaching philosophy and how it relates to the expectations of this class. What I promise to give you and what I expect from you in return, and then that will conclude this orientation video, and I'll make a quiz about it in Canvas that will give you a little bit of extra credit if you do it, just to kind of incentivize you internalizing this message. So, BRB. Okay, I had to go inside because it was hailing really hard outside and there was no tree that could shelter me. So, now I'm inside. I stoked my wood stove, and let's get talking about... There's a hair on my face. Get talking about expectations and just the general philosophy of the course. So one thing that you need to know is that I have really high expectations of you as students for this class. Of course, Biology 160 for a lot of you is probably pretty difficult, and that is just going to depend on your general science background, how much science you've had in the past, how well you understood it during high school, and your interests and aptitudes and things. So you've cleared that hurdle now, and now you've moved from a 100 level biology class to a 200 level. And of course, you're probably thinking like, duh, I know all that. The reason I'm being explicit about it is because students are often a little blindsided by how difficult they find anatomy and physiology right off the bat. And that thing where student expectations do not match reality creates tension and frustration, and a lot of times that is directed at the instructor, which, isn't that I can't take it, but I think it comes from a fundamental misunderstanding, and so I want to explain that first. So A&P is really difficult for a variety of reasons. One, it requires that you have enough base knowledge of biological science and also chemistry and also physics and also language to apply stuff that you should have learned in Biology 160 to A&P. And that leap of application is a leap that many students just aren't used to. And that's not your fault. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It's just a fact of the course and a fact of moving up in the way that you're moving up now. So that's thing number one. Thing number two is the majority of anatomical terminology is going to be unfamiliar to most students. That's because it's mostly Latin and Greek and a mixture of the two with a handful of other names and languages thrown in. But in a very real sense, as you learn anatomy and physiology, you are simultaneously learning Latin and Greek as it applies to the terms that we're looking at. So essentially, you're learning two new languages while you're learning a new science, and you're having to apply a bunch of stuff that you should already know and integrate all that knowledge into one synthesized package. And that's a lot of work. It's really challenging. And so what I'm here to tell you is I have high expectations of you in spite of all the things I just told you. And the reason I have high expectations for you is that as much as students complain to me that the course is really, really, really hard, and as much as students complain to me, sometimes blaming me for the difficulty, BT dubs, I did not make biology difficult on purpose or at all. I don't have that kind of control. It's just hard. But in spite of all of that, time and time again, students who struggled and complained and experienced a lot of frustration end up doing really well. They persevere, they stick to it, they show tremendous grit and determination. They pick themselves back up when they fall down, and they exit the course with a passing grade and often even an A. And I've seen this over and over and over again every term that I've taught A&P. So what I'm here to tell you is, statistically, you're unlikely to be any different from those previous groups of students who struggled and made mistakes and fell and picked themselves back up and did well in the class at the end. Odds are you're like them. And although you will have some growing pains as you adjust to the reality of this new course, you will do well. As long as you put in the work, you make enough time for the class, and you are strongly and deeply committed to learning because you're strongly and deeply committed to the career that you've chosen that requires you to take this class. So that brings me to another point, and that is the following. Of course, all of you want an A because applications to nursing school, dental hygiene school, physical therapy school, occupational therapy school, etc., so forth, regardless of your reason for being in this class, I know that applications to those programs and admittance rates are competitive and that you are focused on a good grade for that reason. I understand that. I have two things to say about it. Thing number one, despite everything you hear in the student rumor mill and the grapevine, etc., you do not have to have straight A's to get into those programs. There are other aspects of your application that also matter. And B, if you view this class as a box to check on the way to what you're going to do for a living, you won't do well in the class. And that's because nursing, dental hygiene, all of the disciplines I just mentioned, they are sciences. They are biological sciences, and they are hard sciences, meaning based in principles that have been repeatedly supported by hypothesis testing and rigorous scientific inquiry. And that scientific inquiry continues, and that's how we advance the field in advanced medical science. So the perception that being a dental hygienist or a nurse or something is sort of like being a nice helper person to actual scientists in the form of a doctor or a dentist, that is a false paradigm. Nursing, dental hygiene, all of these disciplines, these are now disciplines where you are going to be a scientist and you're going to be practicing clinical science on a daily basis. So you need to embrace that. And you also need to understand that what it takes to really excel in science is curiosity. Don't come to class being like, well, I just have to muddle through and memorize this stuff I don't care about because I need my A, and then I'll check the box and then I'll magically become a nurse. You need to be curious enough to be interested in how all the stuff I'm going to tell you works, because that's how you keep your patients healthy, happy, and alive. And that's how you do your job well. So curiosity is a really valuable thing in my class, and curiosity and maintaining a positive, inquisitive attitude towards the subject matter here is really what's going to set you apart from the average student. So try to foster and stoke that curiosity. And that can look a lot of ways, but most of the time it looks like students thinking about something I told them and then relating it to something in their life, maybe an illness they've had or an observation about medical stuff in general, and then raising their hand and telling me that anecdote and asking a question about if it relates to what we're discussing in class. And often the answer is yes, and we can take a moment to describe how that thing relates to what we're discussing and do a real-world application. I encourage those kinds of questions. I actually really enjoy answering them. So if you are in Zoom with me or in an in-class meeting and you feel an impulse to say, my uncle had that and then this happened and I was always curious about why it did, please ask me. I love those questions, and they help us all understand better how the subject matter in this class relates to real life. Apropos of that, I do want to say that I don't consider any questions in this class to be stupid. You're here because you are trying to learn something that's really difficult to learn. You're not here because you're already an expert. So, of course, you're going to have questions, and some of those questions are going to be very basic, rudimentary questions to remind yourself of first principles. That's fine. I welcome that and I encourage it. So, no questions in my class are stupid. And as a corollary to that, I will aggressively defend the right of students to safely ask questions in my class without fear of judgment or ridicule, either from me or from your classmates. So I need you all to commit to me that you're going to foster a positive environment for question asking, which means that if somebody asks a question that you know the answer to and you feel like snickering at them because they didn't know it and you did, I reserve the right to eject you from the classroom for ridiculing your classmates. We need to feel safe asking and answering questions here, and I'm very committed to preserving that safety for you. I want you to feel safe. So, that's my expectation. I set the bar really high, but I know you can clear it. I want you to come curious and interested in asking questions. I also want you to let me know if you are struggling, and we can brainstorm ways to try to solve that or fix it. Don't wait and struggle in silence by yourself and then fail an exam and then come to me. If you notice that you're having a hard time with information sticking, we need to address that early and take care of it before testing. And I have all kinds of ways that I can help you with that, and so do your classmates. Your classmates are actually your best resource for study tips because they know what it's like to actively be learning this stuff. I know it because I've been doing it for years and years. So I don't have quite the same amount of familiarity of what it's like to be in the learning as your classmates do, which makes your classmates a fantastic resource for what worked for them. Because what I recommend is based on my personal experience, but it might not be the right thing for you. And maybe your classmate who sits next to you has just the thing and you didn't think of it, and neither did I. So I encourage you to get to know and lean on each other. I encourage you to ask questions, even if you think they might be stupid. They're not stupid. Feel free to share anecdotes with me about how your life relates to what we're discussing. And be ready to meet in class and in lab with a passion for the biological sciences and a strong drive to understand them, because that's what's going to set you apart as a rock star nurse or the world's best dental hygienist or the greatest occupational therapist the world has ever seen. It's the passion and the curiosity that matters, and the pursuit of those things is what gets you an A. Your primary focus should be the pursuit of passion and curiosity and deep learning, and the A should be an outcome of passion, curiosity, and deep learning, not your primary goal. So that's about all I have to say for orientation stuff for class. The rest of the course mechanics, like when tests are, how many points they're worth, yada yada, those things can be found in the syllabus. So once you've finished watching these videos for orientation and reading the syllabus, I'll give you a little bit of a quiz. Like I said, it'll provide you with a couple extra credit points to sort of give you a little boost right off the bat. And then after this, I'm going to record a video that talks about lab stuff and histology in a little bit more detail to help you orient to those things. And both of those will be posted today so that you'll have access to them right away. And I will email you all when that happens. So thank you for coming with me on the little tour of my farm and listening to me jabber about how the class is and why it is the way it is. And I am so excited to be in the same room with you all and actually learn with you in lab this term. So thanks for your attention. I'll see you in the next video.